If I was your nutrition coach, here is the exact way I would set your macros for fat loss. I would start with not setting your numbers based on your body weight or activity levels. I'd start with this, especially if you're trying to lose fat and especially if you're new to tracking. Before setting your food levels and just giving you a set of macros to track towards, a set of macro targets, I would get you tracking your food levels first. I would get you to use a tracking app like Macros First, Macro Factor, or Log Eat to keep a food log of describing what you typically eat and the serving sizes or weight of those foods, so we can take those food levels and turn them into numbers. I want you to do this for 3 to 5 days, eating normally and not changing a thing. I know it's normal to want to change your food habits or what you're eating if you feel like you're being watched, but we want just a normal representation of what life is like for you right now and how you're eating. Because number one, it's probably not that far off. And number two, it gives us a place to set numbers from, which is going to set you up for success. Now, I also want you to measure your body weight during this process over these 3 to 5 days. Under normal circumstances, usually first thing in the morning after you go to the bathroom wearing similar clothing. These body weight measurements are going to be important because they're going to inform us about how much food you should be eating and where we should set your macros moving forward. Now again, we're not going to just use some textbook calculations and set your targets, which many would do. And if you're doing some research on this, I'm sure you're coming across this as the way to do it. I wouldn't do that because chances are you know what eating healthy looks like. We're just going to do it in a new capacity with some numbers driving some of the change, which are going to be the calories and macronutrients. And your normal food habits are probably not that far off from what you need to be doing to lose fat. You just got to make some small tweaks to the amount of protein you're eating, include a little bit more fruit and or vegetable, all within calorie control, and you will make progress. So once you have this data, once you have this 3 to 5 days worth of tracking, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take averages for the numbers of calories that you consumed every day and for the macronutrients you consumed every day. You're going to do the same thing with those body weight readings as well. The calories are going to be the amount of energy that you consumed from your food or drink, and where those calories come from are going to be the macronutrients. They're going to be the large components of your food that you measure in grams. You probably know what they are. They're protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Now, this may be a new way to set your macro targets, but why should you listen to me? My name is Dr. Mark. I've been an online nutrition coach for the last 10 plus years. And I've worked with thousands of fat loss clients within flexible dieting. I've also created my own nutrition certification program called the Dr. Mark Method. Here's why I love, number one, setting macros so much for clients. I'm a huge proponent of the tracking-based process because through tracking, it's going to control for what matters most when it comes to losing fat, especially with our nutrition. When we can control for those big picture variables like calories and macronutrients, results will come. But this type of approach also allows us to be flexible with our food choices. We don't need to eat clean or eat quote unquote only healthy foods. We can be a bit more flexible, work things in that we typically wouldn't within reason. It doesn't mean that we're just not going to eat healthy, but we don't have to be so black or white with our food choices. We can work other things in and still make progress. That's going to allow you to stick to this process for longer, and what makes tracking macros and tracking your food so effective. And lastly, tracking your macros is a great educational tool. In an ideal world, we would all be mindful eaters. We know how we would feel when we eat certain foods. We would know when enough is enough. We know how much food we need to eat to maintain a healthy body weight and how to lose weight. But for many reasons, our current food environment and how much processed food we have around and social eating, this doesn't always work out like that. As well as the amount of food we eat out of our homes and how busy and stressed we are, it's really tough to be a mindful eater in this day and age. Now, one of the best ways to get to that place is to be much more aware of your food choices, the nutrition that it contains, and how that all fits into a daily level that allows us to maintain our weight or to lose weight. The best way to become a more mindful eater is paying more attention to this stuff and having some structure around this process. And for me and my clients, this means getting closer to the tracking process so we can ultimately remove that layer of control and be a more mindful eater. Now, here's how I would set your macronutrient targets with the data that we collected in that 3 to 5 days. Now, considering we want to lose weight and lose fat, if your body weight didn't substantially change through that process, meaning you didn't lose or gain 1 to 2 pounds from the start or the finish, chances are you're in calorie maintenance. You're eating enough food on average to maintain your body weight, which means the amount of calories you're taking in on average is roughly the same as the amount of calories you're burning on a daily basis. So to set some food levels based on that, we're gonna need to go below that and to be in a calorie deficit. A good place to start is a modest 10% decrease from that level. So take the average, multiply it by 0.1, and remove that amount of calories from your food targets. That is gonna be your calorie level. Now we gotta talk about how do we fill those calories with the macronutrients? Because remember, macronutrients are going to be a function of our calories. They're gonna provide the calories. So we set some buckets almost to fill up those calories. The first thing we should set within those levels, and again, we're not doing this just based on our body weight and activity levels, because chances are those are gonna be much higher than what we need, because there's gonna be discrepancies between what should actually happen when we track our food and what theoretically could happen and what does happen when we start tracking. Humans are involved in this process, and that's what makes the discrepancy between these two things, because when we're tracking our food and reporting it, chances are we're underestimating how much food we're eating, we're missing things. That's all just components of human nature. So we have this calorie target. For many of you, for example, let's say this calorie target is 1,600 calories. Within this target, the first thing we want to set is our protein level. What I want you to do is look at your protein on average through those 3 to 5 days. And if it's below 1.5 grams per kilogram of your body weight, so let's say you're a 70 kilogram individual, if it's below 105 grams, I want you to move right up to there right away. The same number would be 0.7 grams per pound. So if you're 70 kilos or around 150 pounds, you would again be right around that 105 mark. If you're not there, move to there. Now you'll take this protein target and you're going to multiply it by 4, because every gram of protein is gonna have 4 calories, which is also gonna be the same as carbohydrates, but not as fat. Fat's gonna be closer to 9 calories for every gram. But we wanna make up the difference of the remaining calories from carbohydrates and fat. That's gonna be the rest of our pie. So I have my calculator right here. I'm gonna take 105 and multiply it by 4 to give me the amount of calories coming from protein in my diet. That's 420. So I would take that 1,600 divided by 420, and we'll have 1,180 calories remaining. I'm gonna make up the difference with the remaining 1,180 calories coming from carbohydrates and fat. So what I would do is let's split them up evenly. Unless you know for a fact you prefer eating higher carb and low fat, or lower carb and high fat, but let's just split these up evenly. I'll take the 1180 and times it by 0.5 to give me half. 590 divided by 4 for the carbs, so 150 grams rounded up of carbohydrates, added to 105 grams of protein. We're gonna use the remainder for fat. So I had that 1180 times by 0.5, because I have a short memory. 590 now divided by 9, which is going to be 65 grams of fat. Those are gonna be our starting macronutrient targets for someone that is on a deficit at 1,600 calories and around 150 pounds. Just to recap, this is a starting place. We're gonna have 105 grams of protein, 150 grams of carbs, and 65 grams of fat at 1,600 calories. You're gonna use those as a target to start. So to recap what we just talked about, I would set my calorie target based on what's going on with my maintenance levels through the tracking process, and not just use and then fill those targets with actual macronutrients based on the math that we just did, and not just use a textbook calculation or optimal food levels. And here's why. The number one reason being it will set you up for failure in many cases. Here's what can go wrong and what I found in this process setting food levels for literally thousands of people. If you set your macronutrients and energy levels based on what the textbooks say should happen or optimal levels, it's going to set you down the wrong path. I was on a call last night with an aspiring nutrition coach that wanted to get into tracking. She was on a weight loss journey herself, so she wanted to get closer to the calories and macronutrients so she should lose weight. She pumped her levels of her body weight stats and her age into a calculator, and the numbers it spit out made her feel like, hey, that's a lot of food. It's really high. I'm gonna have a hard time eating that much food and losing weight. But she trusted it, got to those numbers, and she didn't lose any weight. She got frustrated, stopped tracking, and then we had this conversation. And that's because these calculations are really good and designed for groups of people and populations of people, but for individuals, they can be somewhat misleading. Some of the calculations are more accurate than others, especially if you have an accurate representation of your lean body mass and activity levels, but not everyone knows that stuff. So it's really just giving you a best estimate. So although these numbers can be a good starting place, they generally aren't all that accurate. And if you yourself are on a weight loss journey and you're trying to get leaner, if you start eating to a level of food that's way too high to begin with, it's gonna, backfire and make you frustrated. Now, there's also a role we play in this, and what happens is that what should allow us to lose weight, which theoretically should happen, can be different than what we eat and report. And that's because on this side, there's human error. There's some underreporting. Generally, people underreport the amount of calories that they're consuming to around like 20 to 30%. This number is lower. So if you have a food level that's also naturally higher and a higher target, and now we have also you're tracking to that target, but there's underreporting, you could think you're in a calorie deficit and generally gain weight, which is the exact opposite direction that we want to be going in without really knowing it. And obviously that's not a great place to start a diet. So now you have a better idea of how I would set your macros for fat loss. Now, as you're doing the tracking at the beginning, if you track for 3 to 5 days and you do lose weight, like your weight comes down 1 to 2 pounds, there's a noticeable difference through that period. You don't need to remove any calories. You're already in a deficit. You could just stay there and then set your protein and split up the remaining carbs and fat. Now, with the numbers that I listed, you could also probably eat more carbs than going 50-50 with the remainder. But generally, this is a good place to start for carbohydrate intake for people that want to lose weight, that haven't tracked much before, and are for the first time working their protein levels up, because they're probably not going to choose leaner sources of protein all the time. Now, why I suggest you do it this way, using what you're currently doing and setting some targets based on that versus using a textbook calculation or using something within the app, is because you're gonna get faster results right off the bat without having to do anything really restrictive, which in my experience is gonna help adherence down the road. Now, if you found this process a little bit complicated and you'd like to do it, but you want some direction, here's what I want you to do. Once you're done watching this video, track your intake for 3 to 5 days. And with those averages, in the comments below, fill me in on the averages, fill me in on your situation a little bit, and I'll help you set your macros for you. I just wanted to put that offer out there because I know I can help. Now back to the video. So the best thing you can do right now is start to track your intake and base the numbers on that and work towards more of those optimal levels of macronutrients. Now, if you're no stranger to tracking, you've done this before, you could probably skip this step and go right to more optimal targets. For protein at maintenance levels, and this all the numbers I'm about to give are at maintenance levels, that's gonna be around 1.5 grams per kilogram to 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. For carbohydrates, this is typically between 3 to 5 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram. And for dietary fat, it's between 0.5 to 1.5. That number is lower because the calories from fat, they're much more dense, right? So the target is lower. You can start there, and that's because you're more accurate to begin with. But if you're completely new to tracking your macros, I'd rather base these numbers on what you're currently doing and move towards the targets that we just talked about, as opposed to setting them based on a textbook calculation or what the app says that you should be doing. That's not really going to factor in optimal protein levels, because that won't set you up for success. Then once you have these targets, remember they're daily totals. You're tracking and eating towards these targets over the course of a day. I'd rather you have the same level of food each and every day and not do any calorie cycling or macro cycling on training days or off days, just because number one, that doesn't really give you too much of an advantage, and it adds another layer of complexity to people that are just getting new to tracking. So set one level of food. And then since we base these targets closer to what you're currently doing right now, you can also set your carbs and fat based on personal preference. If you know in the past, keto's worked well for you, you could try a lower carb approach while still keeping the calories in check, still keeping your protein on the higher end of things, and see better success because you're now tracking towards targets that are in line with your preferences, and you're not doing things that you necessarily don't feel good on, especially right off the bat. And that's it, folks. That's how I would set your macros if I was your nutrition coach. The big lesson here is it's very smart to set macros based on what you're currently doing and moving towards optimal, instead of just listening to what a calculation says or the textbook says, because that's what's going to get you better results right off the bat and allow you to stick to your diet for longer. Now, as great as all those tips are, if you're really serious about starting nutrition coaching or losing some fat, the next thing I'm going to have you do is check out this video I've linked up right here. If you're focusing on weight loss, or you have clients that are focusing on weight loss, you're probably focusing on calories. Even so, you got to make sure that you're eating enough. In this video here, I'm going to show you 5 signs that your calories are too low. You'll learn about all of that in this video. Check it out right now, and I'll see you in the next video.